everyone. Welcome to the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission 2023. I start over again. I never get these buttons right. Okay, I'm going to start over again. So welcome to the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission meeting for May 10, 2023. Will you please join me for the flag salute? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, and Mr. Villalobos, will you please make our television announcement and then go ahead with roll call?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning to the Commission. Planning Commission hearings are televised live on County and Santa Barbara Television, CSB TV, Channel 20 at 9 a.m. in the South Coast, Lompoc, Santa Maria, San Ynez, and Orchid areas. Rebroadcast of Planning Commission hearings are on Fridays after 5 p.m. And today's hearing will also be streamed live on the county's website and will be available for download in the day or two. Would you like me to move on to roll call?
Let's do that.
Okay, and so joining us from South County, Commissioner Cooney.
Here.
Commissioner Bradley.
Here.
Thank you. And Commissioner Farini.
Here.
Commissioner Martinez. Here. And Chair Park.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. And Mr. Wilson, can you tell us about our agenda today and then talk about our projection report?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, thank you. In regards to the status of our agenda today, we have one item on consent, government code consistency or conformity determination, and then we have one item on our standard agenda, which was discontinued from an earlier hearing, which is the project, the North Fork Ranch Frost Ponds. And I believe on that item, the applicants have submitted a request for continuance. However, staff has prepared a follow-up memo on that under the direction of the Planning Commission, and staff is ready to present that today as well. So that is the status of the agenda today. I can move to the projection report, Mr. Chair, if you'd like.
Yes, please do.
Our next scheduled hearing is May 31st, and that will be in Santa Barbara. There are two items on that agenda. A project at the Magnolia Shopping Center, and then the safety element update for wildfire policies. As we've been indicating over the last several hearings, we moved items around. June 7th no longer has any items on it, and none are projected for that date. And then moving to June 14th, the appeal of the transfer permit for the Los Flores pipeline system is still scheduled for that. Note that Commissioner Cooney will be absent on that day. However, staff has been contacting the applicants, and that day still remains the day that the applicants and those that appealed that project would be available. So the commission may keep it on that date, and just know that Commissioner Cooney would be absent on that date. Otherwise, if you cancel that hearing, then they'll have to find another date. Then moving.
And you're just now talking about the June 14 one?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. We're talking about the June 14th. So staff has reached out to the applicants and the appellants on that, and they were struggling to find a date to move it to. So they've kept it on that date because that seems to be the best date for everybody at the time. June 28th is our next hearing, and there's one item, which is a cannabis appeal, and that will be back in the Santa Maria hearing room. And then there are no items projected for July 5th at this time, or July 12th. And then July 26th, we have another appeal of a cannabis cultivation, and that will be in Santa Barbara. And then August 2nd, we have two items, a climbing gym off of Hollister Road, and then a water trust tank, Walker Trust Water Tank project. And that hearing is in Santa Barbara. And then we don't have anything projected again until August 30th. Which is one item, which is an appeal of another cannabis cultivation project. So, Mr. Chair, as you and I have been in discussions, we may be looking at some of those hearings in July for potential workshops on the rec master plan ordinance amendments. but we can follow up with that later as we progress with that project.
Well, regardless of what I've said in the past about maybe starting those at the end of May and going into June, it seems to me at this point, we're really not ready for those workshops that early. Would that be a safe thing to say?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that's a correct assessment. I don't think we'll be prepared with the presentation in end of May or June. I'd forecast that we'd be in better position July, the beginning of July on that.
Well, and we're going to have the June 28th meeting anyway, right? For this cannabis appeal?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. We're still going to have the June 28th hearing.
Right. So that, I don't know if we could schedule a workshop that early or not, but that would be the earliest. But we don't need to, we don't need to cancel the June 28th meeting, but there's not much of a reason to keep the June 7 date open, right?
Mr. Chair, that's correct. June 7th, we would not have any projects at this time. So I would recommend go ahead and canceling the June 7th hearing.
Okay. And, all right. And when should we address canceling those hearings? Should we try and do that right now or, wait?
Mr. Chair, on June 7th, I would recommend we can go ahead and take that action now.
Okay, we need a motion to do that. And then, Mr. Martinez, would you like to make that motion? Because I know you're going to recuse yourself later and I want to
Yes,
have you
to be-
earn your per diem, you
yeah,
know?
that's right. To be active, I will make that motion.
Very good. And Mr. Reno, second,
Second.
right? Good. All right. Well, all in favor, do we have any public comment on this motion? Do we have to ask for that? I did, we won't. And do we have any deliberations from our South County members who I can hear as disembodied voices like angels from on high or something like that?
Mr. Chair, we are prepared to support the motion.
Okay. Mr. Villalobos, you conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Farini,
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez,
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, and now, Secretary Wilson, you said something about if the June 14 meeting would be canceled or not. What direction is that coming from?
So Mr. Chair, I will leave that to the discretion of the commission. Right now, it's scheduled for that hearing to occur on June 14th, which is appeal of the ownership of the Las Flores pipeline system. Applicants have talked to the appellants and the applicants, and that date still remains the best date for them at this time. The note was that Commissioner Cooney would be absent, so there would only be 4 commissioners available that date, but we could go ahead and have the hearing. So that was just a decision for the commission.
Mr. Chair.
And that's Commissioner Cooney.
Yes, thank you. I wasn't sure if you could tell that we had comment. I had a meeting spontaneously a few minutes ago with Mr. Zorovich, and he provided more detail than I had about the content of the hearing on the 14th of June. I will be absent. I will be out of the country on a trip planned many months ago, but I was concerned about leaving the commission with an important matter, and what he indicated was that it is fairly preliminary. There will be changes before it gets to the commission, so I'm certainly supportive of the meeting being held, though I will not be there.
Okay, so I'm not hearing from any commissioners that they want to cancel the meeting. I think the concern in general, and I don't really know anything about this item, is that when you only have 4 commissioners, you can have a 2-2 tie, and then you have to sort of figure out if there's a tie, is it a denial of a project or a denial of an appeal or whatever. And sometimes we're not even sure whether a matter is an appeal until we do the findings after the hearing. So be it. We'll just go ahead and with that hearing. Did you have anything else to say on the projection report, Secretary Wilson?
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, that concludes my report on the projection report.
And do any of our commissioners have questions of Secretary Wilson on that? Guess not. Okay. Well, let's go on to public comment. And public comment would be on matters not on the agenda. So if you want to speak on North Frost Ponds, for example, don't speak now, save that for later. This would be on items not on the agenda. We limit that to 15 minutes total. And I asked that any speaker limit their comments to 3 minutes. Do we have anyone here for public comment?
Mr. Chair, we do have one hand up, and that is by Otis Califf.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Mr. Califf.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair and committee members. My name is Otis Califf. I'm Chair of the County Riding and Hiking Trails Advisory Committee. We'd like to especially thank Commissioner Park for speaking up for trails on the Moore Ranch project last week. CRATAC is deeply concerned over the cumulative impact of development to the county's trail system. Such impacts are not being adequately addressed in the county's CEQA documents. As best we can tell, there are roughly 12 recently completed, approved, or pending projects with adverse impacts to existing or planned trails, but nobody at county appears to be keeping track as required by CEQA. We don't know the cumulative effects of all this. Physical impacts include extended closure of trails, major aesthetic changes, that's like tree removal, roads overlying trails, etc., or rerouting of trails in Mission Canyon, Valley View and Orchid, or Hot Springs in Montecito. CEQA documents are not disclosing such cumulative impacts. Also of concern is county's inability or failure to exact new easements from small to mid-sized projects due to legal concerns. Moore Ranch is an example, but there are at least 6 to 8 other such recent projects. And as you well know, that's the way, as Mr. Cooney knows, that's the way so many of the trails in Montecito were acquired, the easements. Without such easements, many trails such as Hot Springs, San Isidro, Franklin, and the Summerlin Trail system would not exist. There's also a serious lack of consistent notice to CRATAC and trails community of such projects. No trails groups were noticed on the Moore Ranch. That's why we weren't there. That trail, incidentally, is extremely important to us. The Regan Ranch and Dos Vistas Ranch block the which was originally planned in 45 as the California Riding and Hiking Trail. If it's blocked just by those two properties from being accessible all the way from Matilaha Hot Springs out of Ojai to the Gaviota Hot Springs. And so it's a very, very important throughway. We respectfully request that the commission carefully review all projects with existing and planned trails to protect and expand our trail system and ensure that the trails community has been noticed and involved. Thank you very much.
Mr. Califf, I want to respond just for a moment. And let me just make a suggestion that I hope you take as a constructive suggestion.
Yes.
With the many forms of communication that come to us, often they're pretty critical and talk about what the commission doesn't do, what P&D doesn't do, what the county doesn't do. And I'm not arguing with that. And I may be sympathetic with some of those things. But I think if we want to move forward in a positive way, having even a one-page memo from you and others that has some constructive, practical suggestions would be very much appreciated and would be a good way of of getting more of what you want.
Excuse me, a one-page memo from whom?
You or
From whom? You said a one page.
from you or anyone who is acting in concert with you or CRATAC or the Trails Council or anyone who wants to. I'm just suggesting that a simple, practical request would be very much appreciated and would help us respond to these kinds of comments.
To you, the planning commission.
Well, to me or to any of our commissioners or to Director Plowman, we'll make sure it gets distributed. but
Okay,
it's-
we've already sent a letter, CRATAC sent a letter to Plowman, and we haven't really gotten a response.
Okay,
And
well,
and the county council actually responded that they were their responsibility to notify CRATAC was very limited, they said. She interpreted it that way. So,
well,
I mean,
I'd like to make sure all our agencies get along and are as effective as possible. And I think those
Yeah.
two things go well together. So I just reiterate my request that whatever your complaints, try to boil some of it down to constructive, practical suggestions that we can bring up and talk about, whether publicly or in private.
okay, thank you very much. I think that's an excellent idea. And we'll generate that. We'll work on that. Work
Okay,
with
thank you.
on it too.
Do we have any other public comment?
Not for this portion of the agenda.
Okay. Our next item on the agenda is our planning commissioners' informational reports. Do we have any of those? No, then let's go on to the minutes. And we'd be considering the minutes of April 26, 2023.
I'll move to approve pending any editorialization made by the South County folks.
Okay. And do I hear a second?
Mr.
You have a
Chair,
second?
I'll second with no comments. The minutes appear to be accurate and complete.
Okay. Do we have any other commissioners that feel the need to comment on the content of those minutes of April 26? Well, let's go ahead with our roll call vote. And they are roll call votes today, right? Because we have remote, yeah.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Brightly,
Aye.
Commissioner Franny,
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez,
Aye.
Mayor Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. And who will render our director's report today?
Mr. Chair, I'm remote.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I have a short report for you today. Not a whole lot has happened since we last met, but a couple of things I just want to keep on the board's, or I'm sorry, the Planning Commission's front of mind is the budget workshops, which will be held on June 16th and June 20th. That's a Friday and a Tuesday in June. I did also want to update the Planning Commission on the fact that, you know, we had been working with HCD on trying to obtain early comments on the housing element, with the idea that we would get a checklist within 30 days and that we could at least have one round of review within the 90-day review period that the state has. Unfortunately, we've heard that the staff person assigned to review our housing element resigned. And so now the lead of that section, Paul McDougall, is having to review our documents. So our hope of getting early comments is probably not going to come to fruition. So we'll keep working with them. In the meantime, we're continuing to advance some of the objectives of the board and the planning commissions. I'm sure we'll support these, and that has to do with developing a concept around local preference for future housing units and making sure that units get occupied by the employees, which are the two are obviously tied together. Those are programs that are in the housing element, but we're starting to work on ideas now. The programmatic EIR is underway, and we're working with the consultant on getting that moving. We expect something for public review in late summer. I also want to remind everybody, it's probably the last time I'll do this, but that is the Montecito Watershed Study that will be held on May 23rd at Montecito Union School from 5:30 to 7. And then I did want to just remark on some of the comments made by the CRATAC chair. We have been working with a member of CRATAC and ensuring that the process that advances projects that have potential impacts to trails get to CRATAC for their review. So we'll continue to work on that effort, but there has been coordination between the department and that body. And then lastly, just the future board items. We have next week on the 16th, the extension of the COVID and economic recovery ordinance amendments, which the PC has already heard. The Coral Casino appeal looks to be going on the 11th of July, and then the safety element wildfire stuff that will also go on the 11th of July. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions of Ms. Plowman? I just want to share one comment. I've had a few discussions with you about the local preference idea and so forth. And I think that stuff is really exciting, and I'm glad you're personally working on it. I look forward to sharing that more with the commission and the community. I think that we can grumble about the time it takes to do the housing element, but I think we've got some really great ideas that can be embodied in it. So I look forward to that.
Thank you. I should mention that the state is working on something too. We had a meeting with the head of HCD, Director Velasquez, and he indicated that they are working on something. And so I've reached out to his assistant to try and give them our perspective on what we're looking for. I appreciate that.
Very good.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move on to the consent agenda. And we do have one item on that. If any of the commission members want to ask about it or make comments or otherwise do anything that would trigger a hearing, then we'll pull it off the consent agenda and put it on the standard agenda. Otherwise, we would just vote on whether to adopt the consent agenda or not. Do any of the commissioners want to address this particular item? Do you want me to pull it from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chair, I would like to have it pulled off for the opportunity for comment.
Okay. Let's go ahead and hear that as item number 1, okay, on the standard agenda, just because I don't think it'll take as long as the other matter, and it'll affect Commissioner Martinez's scheduling, I think, pretty importantly.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Bradley down here. Can you help us understand what is Commissioner Martinez's constraint?
Well, why don't you go ahead, Mr. Martinez?
As in the last time that North Fork Ranch was heard before the planning commission, I have a conflict yeah.
Great. So thank you for schedule. Thank you for the suggestion to get the consent item on to the regular agenda now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, then I think we would start with a staff presentation. Do we have staff ready to go on this?
Mr. Chair, let me read it into the record before.
Oh, yes, we start with that and then ex parte disclosures if there are any, and then staff.
The project case number 23 GOV3 is a request by the Community Services Department for California Government Code Section 65402A determination that the project conforms to the County of Santa Barbara Comprehensive Plan. And I believe the project planner is joining us remotely.
Very good. Do we have any ex parte disclosures from commissioners on this item?
Mr. Chair, I do.
Okay,
It's extended staff, but I had a couple conversations with Terry Mouse-Nisich, who is serving as a volunteer from the AO's office to see this thing through, and that's it. The rest of them were conversations with staff, which were helpful.
okay. Anyone else? Well, now let's go ahead with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Willow Brown. I'm the planner on the project. The project is a request of the Community Services Department for a 65402 determination to find the proposed interim housing site in conformance with the comprehensive plan. The housing site will be located at 4500 Hollister Avenue and will be comprised of 90 modular cabins for people experiencing homelessness. In addition to the housing units, the site will include office space, clinic, laundry, shower, restroom, and dining units. There will also be services provided on site, including housing navigation and supportive services, medical support, public health nurses visits, meals, and overnight shelter. The property will be leased by Dignity Moves La Posada LLC, a nonprofit agency, for a term of 5 years. Staff and the applicant are available for any questions.
Do we have any questions of staff thus far? Apparently no. And do we have any kind of applicant presentation?
Chair Park, I think CSD staff are here to answer any operational questions. As a consent item, I don't think we informed them to do a presentation. Willow, do they have a presentation? Do you know?
There's no presentation, but we
Right.
have the site plan if it's of interest.
But they can certainly answer any operational questions or site plan details the commissioners might have.
Okay. Well, let's ask that now. Now that commissioners know that we have a staff from the applicant available from CSD, do you have any questions of CSD staff?
I'm sorry, yeah, I do, as long as we're
Okay.
discussing it. And
Fire away.
thank you. And this might follow on with some information I had from Ms. Nisich, but if community services staff, is it Ms. Albers that's with us? Do we know? Do we know? Well, community services staff, thank you for attending. I'm hoping that you can clarify the disposition of the existing juvenile hall population. What I understood is that that population is no longer there and it's being temporarily used by the probation department. And where I'm going with this is that the establishment of the Dignity Moves temporary project would then essentially replace what was the former juvenile hall population there. Is that can you maybe confirm that or clarify that?
This is Kimberly Albers from the Community Services Department. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, commissioners. Yes, that is correct. This was the former site of the South County Juvenile Hall. It has not been used for that purpose for a number of years. There are a few probation staff that are currently on site. So this is this is replacing that use, if that's the right word.
Thank you. I think that helps. That helps some members of the public understand the intensity proposed. That's all my questions.
Okay. Anyone else have questions for CSD staff? Then let's move on to public comment if there is any. I don't see any speaker slips here. Do we have anyone in cyberspace that wants to talk to us?
I don't see any hands raised for this item.
Okay. Then I think we've had anyone who would present on this present. So the public hearing is closed. Are there any final remaining questions from planning commissioners about this matter? Then will one of the commissioners want to make a motion regarding it?
Mr. Chair, yes, I would make the motion in accordance with the staff report to find this project consistent with the comprehensive plan and other matters. But in doing so, I wanted to add that I have quite a bit of knowledge about the Dignity Moves projects that are already in place or about to be. The one in Santa Barbara downtown on Garden Street has been in place for, I would guess, almost a year. And it has been well received by the City Council of Santa Barbara. Very much attention paid to the quality of life of the residents who have been fortunate to be placed in this location. I'm particularly impressed with all of the services available to residents and the idea of Dignity Moves, the nonprofit entity that manages the project, is that they would expand to other locations in Santa Barbara County. I'm sure one of our North County commissioners can talk about the project going forward in Santa Maria. And this would be the third, the second on the South Coast. And from my standpoint, it has high hope for success in dealing with the homeless population.
Mr. Chair, can I second that motion and add a couple deliberative comments?
Certainly.
Happy to hear Commissioner Cooney's knowledge about Dignity Moves and how this model is moving forward. I also just want to explain that I did a site visit and out of curiosity, I had a couple conversations with staff which were illuminating in that this is temporary. So these little pods are here for a while, but then they can move around as community services sees that need. Secondly, the project is actually in a pretty good space in terms of transit provision and bike lanes and access to public services, which is important for this kind of a thing. Again, it's a temporary basis. And thirdly, because it's replacing that population, and it's zoned and the general plan designation is for institutional use that allows for this kind of an operation, I would wholeheartedly support the motion to make the findings provided in our staff report. That's it.
Okay. Any other comments and deliberation by other commissioners on this item before we vote on it? Well, hearing none, then let me ask you, Mr. Villalobos, to conduct a roll call vote.
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Bridley,
Aye.
Commissioner Farini,
Aye.
Commissioner Martinez,
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay. This is. Okay. Do we need any time to set up for the next item? Ready to roll? Okay, then let's go forward and read it into the record. And it was item 1. It's being handled second, but it's.
All right. Excuse me. The following is a hearing on the request of Brodaya Inc. property owner consider case number 16 CUP 5 and to certify the environmental impact report 21 EIR 2 pursuant to state guidelines for implementation of the California Environmental Quality Act.
And at this time, I believe this is when I recuse myself.
Okay,
Yes. Pardon me.
but as you know, we have other planning commission business for you to attend to today, so don't go back to your office.
Okay, I will.
All right.
I'm gonna go to the country club and hang out there for a little while.
You've read it into the record. Let's go ahead with ex parte disclosures from commissioners.
This is Commissioner Bridley, and I just had a short call with Anna Citrin, the appellant in the case, yesterday.
Okay. Any others?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have one brief telephone call with one of the appellants, well, actually with two of the appellants, Roberta Jaffe and her husband, and that was yesterday.
Commissioner Freeney, do you have any to report? I have one, well, I don't know if they're reportable or not. I did get an email a few weeks ago from Eldon Schiffman, and I thought since it was addressed to me as planning commissioner and dealt with planning commission business, it should be on the public record. So I sent that to Mr. Villalobos, and I believe you put it in the public record. And then I received a couple of emails from Andy Caldwell, and I think they were sent to you too, Commissioner Freeney. Okay. And I actually didn't know whether they were intended to be communications for the record or what. One seemed more like a column. It wasn't so much addressed to us, but it was about us. And so I didn't send those on to I didn't think to send those on to Mr. Villalobos and get them in the public record. If that's important, we can address it later. But I noticed I have a speaker slip from Mr. Caldwell, and maybe he can address that today when he speaks. So that's it for our ex parte disclosures. All right, well, let's have our staff report on where we are today.
So, Mr. Chair, just sorry to jump in. So there's two items. One, staff did bring back findings for denial as directed by the Planning Commission. The applicants have submitted a request for a continuance. So if the commission wanted to take action on that request first, they could do that and then move forward to the hearing on reviewing and making a determination on the findings for denial. So that there's some options for the commission. So we may want to address the request for continuance first and then move further on that.
Okay, let's, I think we should probably do that just because if the continuance is granted, that it renders the other things we would do not moot forever, but would be delayed. So do we need any further staff presentation on the request for continuance?
Mr. Chair, yes. We heard earlier that staff had done a memo on this continuance request, and I didn't see it. Not sure when it came in, but I haven't seen it. If they could briefly explain or summarize their memo, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, I think I might have misstated that. We did not prepare a memo for the continuance. The memo I was referring to was a memo related to the findings for denial. So staff prepared those findings for denial and submitted a memo as directed by the Planning Commission. And then subsequently, the applicant team had submitted a letter directly to the commission requesting a continuance. So there's no memo for the continuance request.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Okay. Do we have any, see, what would our order be here? Any presentation from the applicant on this particular matter, from this part of it? Mr. Tetley? Okay. Do you think you can limit your comments on this to 5 minutes or so?
Yes, I certainly can, Mr. Chair.
Okay, well, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Brian Tetley. Good morning, Mr. Chair, commissioners in Santa Barbara and staff. I'm Brian Tetley with Rural Planning Services, a land use agent for North Fork Ranch. And subsequent to the March 29th hearing before you all, we considered your comments and the concerns that are expressed during the hearing. And we would like to request a continuance in this matter so that we could address those in a serious and substantive way for this project to move forward. And specifically those issue areas that we think were important to the commission and for the project to move forward were to study and analyze alternative frost protection measures, including the wind turbine option, which was a lot of the discussion we had at the hearing about the alternatives to the water frost protection method. The enhanced evaporation calculations to use on-site information. The EIR extrapolated from UN FAO information about evaporation rates and did not include information from on-site soils and the on-site conditions. So we'd like to be able to study that with on-site information. An analysis of alternative mitigation measures to reduce the effective water use of the project, and also to study alternative avoidance and mitigation measures for impacts to native grasslands, which I know was a concern expressed during that hearing. As part of this process, we're hoping you'd be able to allow us for the continuance if you did determine to deny the project and the applicant were to avail themselves of an appeal to the Board of Supervisors. Likely through the normal course of this type of process, additional information that would be requested from the Board of Supervisors would then be referred back to the Planning Commission, and the changes to the AR potentially to be recirculated would come back to this body. So we think a continuance would be a more effective use of time and be more beneficial for the project as a whole. And I also have Ray Shady here, the representative from the applicant, who has just a minute or two to talk about some technical things that could be done to further analyze and study the project for you. Thank you.
And so, Mr. Shady, you're going to speak to the request for continuance?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Chair Park, members of the commission. So just to illuminate a little bit more on what Brian was alluding to in our letter, I felt like I heard it loud and clear as far as the objections to what was brought forward in the last meeting, wanting to know more about what wasn't in the EIR as far as alternative methods. What other options are there for frost protection? How well might they work on the property, and actually have that be studied further? So that would be to look at wind machines. There was talk of alternative heat sources. So, how many miles of electrical resistive wire could you put out, and how many watts would that take? Getting into other heat sources, propane heaters that would run in concert with wind machines. These are the sorts of things that could be investigated. Also, I felt like the concepts around the FAO method for calculating evaporative loss were not entirely clear, or like you had to dig really deep into the EIR to understand what are the physics that are going on in this calculation. So looking at the water balance of water applied for phase change, frost protection, how it melts off, lands on the ground, and where does it go from there? There's key details in that evaporative loss calculation that could be simplified and distilled up into like, here are the most important pieces to this loss, and how could we as farmers or the systems that we build on the vineyard move to mitigate this loss. That's kind of the center point of all of this discussion. And then also, Commissioner Park, your point about the native grasses not being addressed well enough in the plan, I want to take a stab at addressing that too. So what that solution would be, I don't know now, but we would make sure that the right people get involved in finding that solution.
Now, I may have actually gone incorrectly in the process, because this is an appeal we determined after our last hearing, I think it was. So appellants would have the right to address this. I don't know if the appellant should have gone first or not on this particular part, but we are where we are.
Chair Park, I think it's appropriate because it was a request from the applicant for a continuance, but it would be a good idea to hear from appellant as well as public comment.
So that's what I want to do. I want to hear from the appellants. And you notice the applicants took about 5 minutes, so could you stay in that range? And then we'll go to public comment on this particular piece of the hearing, just whether there would be a continuance or not. Okay, how are we connected to the appellants? Okay, Ms. Citron, will you go ahead?
Good morning, Chair Park and Commissioners. So were you asking for the appellant to come forward?
Well, first I want to resolve.
Oh, I'm
Ms.
sorry.
Citron, who is going to speak, as I understood. No,
If Ms. Jaffe could speak first, that would be better. Thank you.
okay.
We're both speaking for appellants.
Okay, Ms. Jaffe, you are an appellant and you're going to speak. So go ahead.
That's my understanding. Good morning, Chair Park and fellow commissioners. I'm speaking in regard to Bordea Inc.'s request for continuance on this project. This project in February of 2019, so over 4 years ago, the Board of Supervisors, based on an appeal by Bordea after the Planning Commission's earlier recommendation for an EIR, approved the EIR and set the EIR process in motion. There has been over 4 years between the start of the EIR process and today. And during that time, the EIR went through multiple iterations, immense staff time went into reviewing and revising, as well as the EIR consultants, as well as public comment. That has all been said, and all of this information that Bordea is now asking for more time for has been in the EIR and questioned by comments and addressed in revisions over that 4-year period. There might be more information to gather, but there's not going to be any new findings that's going to change the fact that we're dealing with a critically overdrafted basin. All these findings are in the EIR in detail, and they've been further addressed in the March 29th hearing. So as a representative of the community and as an appellant, we strongly urge that you do not continue this permit process any longer, and that you move on to reviewing the findings. Thank you.
And Ms. Citron, did you have something to add?
Yes, and I will be very brief. I just wanted to mention that we heard from the applicant that the 4 additional studies they're recommending were intended to be responsive to the Commission's concerns at the last hearing. And we actually found the request to be quite the opposite. They address issues that even if studied further, really would not move the needle on this project. The enhanced evaporation calculations, this is not a case where we are close to the threshold. This project, based on the calculations completed by the applicant's consultant, show that this project will exceed the county's threshold by 2-fold in a normal year and nearly 9-fold in a heavy frost year. So there's really no point to this additional delay on alternatives. I will say that we had been requesting from the very first draft of the EIR that alternatives be considered in detail. They were not. So we provided our own evidence. We provided extensive comments, substantial evidence in the form of trade publications, scholarly articles, testimony from appellants who observed the use of wind machines in the field and their success. So there is ample substantial evidence supporting the feasibility of those alternatives. And it's important to note that the applicant can go forward and pursue those alternatives today with no county process, no county permits. And that is something that they can do or they can do it now when the project is denied. So again, this is more detailed in our letter. I don't want to belabor the point, but we do not see this continuance request as justified in any way. And we would urge you to deny it. Thank you.
Okay, let's now move to public comment just on the continuance request. And so if you make public comment now on the continuance request, you still have the right to make public comment on the merits if we get to the merits. So is there anyone who wants to speak to the continuance request right now? It's either in the room or on Zoom or however else.
And for those joining us on Zoom, if you want to speak on this, go ahead and raise your hand.
We have one on Zoom too. And how many in the room? 1, 2. Okay. Let's hear from the 2 in the room first, and then we'll pick up our Zoom speaker. 3. Okay. So I don't have slips for you just on this, just state your name and.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Kevin Merrill. I represent the Santa Barbara County Farm Bureau and the State Farm Bureau. I'm the District 4 rep on the state board representing Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. Farm Bureau sent a letter of support for this project since it started. However, we are certainly in support of the continuance to allow this project to move forward. So we are in support of the continuance. Thank you.
Okay. Then we have, I'm going to call on Mr. Caldwell. I saw his hand, and I bet he'd love to have the last word, but at least you get a word.
Chair Park, members of the commission, Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. I'm going to save the bulk of my comments to the next part of this, but I'll tell you the reason I'm here and the reason that you should grant a continuance is I've been doing serving CoLab for 32 years. We've never, ever seen a denial and an EIR required for something that's just basic to agriculture before. So in that regard, this to us is an extraordinary process. And we feel that if, in fact, the applicant has the opportunity to give you more information that would perhaps educate you on why the wind turbines and this, that, and the other weren't working, they should be given that benefit. I've never seen an EIR done. We've seen EIRs for buildings and things like that, but never for a practice in the ground having to do with the water, et cetera, et cetera. It's unprecedented. You know, we've had these conversations. I never come here. This was extraordinary to us. We just feel like if they have more information, if they feel that they can better inform the commission, they should be given that opportunity. It's not going to cost the county anything for them to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Roy.
Chair Park and Commissioners, I'm Roy Reed. I'm president of the Santa Barbara County Taxpayers Association. With respect to applicants' request for continuance, it seems that they have been quite forthright in responding to the various requests of planners and your commission for several years over great time and great expense for them. It further appears that at the last hearing, some issues emerged that they feel the need to respond to adequately before you can make the best decision relative to their project. And we feel simply, I also find it amusing that some speakers tend to discount those proposed studies and as inadequate even before they've had an opportunity to be performed. In essence, what we would ask that you take this opportunity to demonstrate fairness and consideration and grant applicants' request for a continuance. We think this would give you the ultimate opportunity to more fully examine the project and make the final decision rather than finding denial and just starting the whole process of appeal, et cetera. We think by giving them that continuance, it would represent a far more efficient use of your resources and county resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Okay, now, well, we would have rebuttal at this time if, oh, we have, oh, that's right, the Zoom comment. I'm sorry, I forgot you already.
Our next speaker will be Emma Yip, to be followed by Lynn Carlisle.
Hi, County Commissioners. My name is Emma Yip. Thanks for this opportunity to speak. I'm a third-year law student at UC Davis, and I oppose the continuance that's being requested. I learned about this hearing this morning, and I'm very concerned about Harvard's request for a continuance. I think the EIR process for this project has been a really long and drawn out one already. And I think it's really worth considering the positions of the applicant and opposition groups. Harvard may have the resources to drag out this issue, but opponents are relying on grassroots support and university students like myself, which are stretched very thin. I think a continuance at this point gives Harvard an unfair advantage that can deeply reflect imbalance in monetary resources. Just because Harvard can drag this out doesn't mean that they should. Thank you.
And could you state your name for the record? I don't think that you did.
My name is Emma Yip, Y-I-P.
Okay. And then our next speaker.
Our next speaker will be Lynn Carlisle.
Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Lynn Carlisle. I'm the Executive Director of the Cuyama Valley Family Resource Center and staff of the Cuyama Valley Community Association. We've been following the groundwater issue and this project since its inception. And we also only received notice yesterday that the continuance had been filed, which did not give our community much time to prepare comments or have people present at this hearing to make comment on this continuance. We are firmly hoping that the commission will deny this continuance. The EIR has been under development for the past 4 years, and review and examination of that EIR has drawn considerable resources and expense from the county and from the community. If a revised EIR is developed that mitigates the need for groundwater and reservoirs, then perhaps the best plan would be to deny the current proposed project, as 15 acres of reservoir will not be necessary. It's also not true, as stated by a prior speaker, that the results of a continuance will not cost the commission or the county anything. In fact, any revision will cost, again, considerable expense to review and provide staff comment and go through this entire process all over again. I also concur with Ms. Citron's comment that all of the options have been reviewed and vetted and suggested and recommended and should have been reviewed by the applicant for the best possible project. What they presented was not the best possible project for groundwater in the Cuyama Valley. And any future plan to approve additional extraction from the basin, which, as we've all said, is critically overdrafted, runs counter to the efforts that the Santa Barbara County Water Agency, Kern, Ventura, San Luis Obispo counties, and community members have been working toward over the past 8 years, namely to reduce pumping to bring the basin into balance, not permit any increased pumping, as any future version of this project will certainly do. I urge you to deny this continuance. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Do we have any others, members of the public want to speak on this particular item?
There are no additional speakers on Zoom.
Okay, and do we have any rebuttal by either the applicant or appellant? And this is appellant, I think. Come on up to the podium.
Good morning, Chair Parks and the rest of the commissioners. Thank you. I'm Steve Gleesman, co-owner and resident farmer in the Cuyama Valley. And as a rebuttal, again, we'll refer to comments made by many of us about how long this process has been going on. The information that we as appellants have requested from the applicants, and I'll choose 2 of the 4 points to focus in on with that. First of all, the frost protection systems itself. In our review of past information that they have provided in the draft EIRs and the final EIR, we made lots of suggestions about the different kinds of frost protection systems that could be used and studied, and with the results presented sooner instead of a continuance, including the options of, say, electric wires or the wind machines themselves. That information has not been forthcoming. The other has to do with the mitigation of the grasslands that would be impacted by all 3 reservoirs. And to me, it's quite interesting that in the final EIR, despite an initial recommendation to not even construct the 3rd one, which would negatively impact the grassland, that was ignored. And we went forward with the idea of the 3rd one, which would then have required a difficult mitigation process, which in our climate, with the unpredictability of rainfall and the difficulty of establishing perennial grasslands, again, it would have been best to continue with no construction of that 3rd pond at all. So these are just 2 examples, I think, of where they've had the opportunity and not taken it to provide the information that they're now requesting a continuance to provide. Thank you.
And Ms. Citron, do you have anything to add on the appellant's rebuttal?
Just 2 points briefly, Chair Park. Thank you. We heard in public comment from Mr. Roy that the continuance request speaks to issues that emerged at the last hearing. And I know this has been said by Mr. Gleesman, but just to be absolutely clear, these were not new issues that arose at the last hearing. These were issues that have been discussed. They've been presented in public comment. They've been discussed in responses to comment on the various draft EIRs. So these are issues that the applicant has had ample opportunity to address previously, and this last minute attempt to stall when they are confronted with denial findings is a tactic that we hope the commission will not see any value in entertaining. And finally, Mr. Shady mentioned that if this were appealed to the Board of Supervisors, that it would somehow end up back before the Planning Commission regarding environmental review. And I am not understanding how that would occur. It seems to me that the board would make a decision, and this would not be efficient in any way to have a continuance for the review at this stage. And instead, we urge the commission to move forward with this item. The public has, and Cuyama community is deeply invested in this. And we have done our side, fulfilled our side of the work. We've submitted timely comment letters that detail the reasons why we object to the continuance and support the denial findings, which we'll discuss later. So we urge you please to move ahead with this item and reject the applicant's belated continuance request. Thank you.
Right. And do we have any rebuttal comments from the applicants? Mr. Tetley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brian Tetley again with Rural Planning Services. Just 2 points real quick is comments about belated responses from the applicant. Of course, we've been working with staff and various decision makers for 7 years now for this project. And so in regards to the EIR process, I mean, we work heavily with staff on responses and the approaches, and ultimately staff makes their recommendations. And of course, once that hit the planning commission on March 29th, then we got the responses from your commission, the decision makers on this item. And so we're here to respond to that in the best way we can. We didn't want to, think ahead to what the commission may say. We heard what you said and some of the public comments, and we are proposing a way to address these. In regards to the process moving forward, as Ms. Citron knows fully well, the Board of Supervisors, if they're to hear an appeal on the project, assuming they don't just deny the project outright and want more information that requires additional analysis and changes to the IRR, by matter of process, we'll refer it back to your commission to review those changes in the EIR, because they don't typically want to handle the technical review aspects. They rely on your commission for that. So that's how the process will most likely unfold if we were to have a denial today and we were to choose to appeal the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any comments from staff, our planning staff, on this at this point?
Chair Park, I think as directed, staff did prepare denial findings for the project. We are not commenting on the continuance request. This is truly your discretion as to what you want to do. We're prepared to go forward with the denial. We're looking for your direction here.
Okay, and when I refer to staff, I'm usually looking over at P&D, but I also want to give County Council an opportunity to speak to this if you'd like to, Ms. Richardson.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, I just wanted to clarify a procedure item.
Sure.
So the last time this was appealed to the board, just the CEQA determination was appealed. And that's why once the board made a decision on that, it returned back to the Planning Commission. If today the Planning Commission elected to deny the project and that was later appealed, the entire project and CEQA would go to the board. And if the board wanted additional CEQA, it would go back to staff and then return to the board. It wouldn't come back to the Planning Commission.
Got it. Okay, and do any of the commissioners have questions of Ms. Richardson or our planning and development staff at this point? Hearing none, then let's go ahead and have our deliberations about this part of the project that's in front of us today, and that is whether we continue it or not. Any of the commissioners like to speak to the continuance request? Have Commissioner Farini.
Just want to make sure someone in South County didn't want to go first, and then if they're good, I'll go. Can you check with them?
You go, we'll get them.
All right, okay. Well, pretty interesting morning here. I don't know why all of a sudden everyone's in a hurry. When the project came to us and then when they needed to do an EIR, everybody knows that takes a lot of time. That's not really the applicant's problem. It's not their prerogative for an EIR to take as long as it does. So I don't think they should be in the penalty box for timeliness based on the time it takes an EIR to do. In fact, I heard from almost a majority of the speakers today that EIRs are a long and drawn out process. So there's the reward. It takes a long time. This type of process demands patience and thoroughness. Growers are not used to being told what to do. They have a right to farm ordinance in place, and they use that so that they can adopt the best agricultural practices available to them at the time. So now we are forcing a grower to evolve, and that's going to take more time to look at those processes. And I hold them in high regard for asking us, hey, give us time to go research those processes and come back hopefully with modifications that will allow us to move forward and save this crop. So I'm very much in favor of granting a continuance to the applicant.
And Folks in the South County office, what do you have to say about this?
Mr. Chair, if I might speak about my reaction to the request for continuance only, it seems to me it's much like a trial that the judge issues tentative rulings, and then the other party would propose to have another shot at the evidence, and that isn't the way it proceeds in court. And I feel this is a similar situation. We're at the end of the line as far as the Planning Commission's role is here. We have agreed on the merits. Now we're just making the findings, and we should proceed to return our holding as based on the findings, and then it's up to the applicants. And I think from what our fellow Commissioner Farini has pointed out to us several times, this may bring about significant right to farm issues, and they're appropriate to be heard by the board on this project at this time. So I would oppose the continuance.
Chair Park, as long as we're in the South County, may I speak? I always learn so much when Commissioner Farini speaks because he knows this sector far better than I do. But I am going to side with Commissioner Cooney here. I have to freely admit that I didn't review all of the environmental documents that I had prepared to discuss on March 29th. I was better prepared for that hearing because I thought this decision had clearly been made. This CEQA process has gone through, I believe, 4 separate CEQA documents. And if that's not correct in the record, forgive me because I don't have all the staff reports in front of me. Today's action was going to be a denial finding acceptance, and I think staff did a good job on that. I know we're not talking about that now. This is just on the continuance. However, the reason for the continuance is to dig up additional data and information, which I do believe was discussed and evaluated in the previous CEQA rounds. And so I don't see any reason to continue this. Tagging on to what Commissioner Cooney just stated, I think if there are additional micrograms of drops of water that can be demonstrated, that can go to the Board of Supervisors. This is a classic example of continuing something on in hopes of something changing, but my opinion of the case is still to not support it and go for the denial. So I would not be in favor of the continuance. Thank you.
Well, since Commissioner Martinez has left, it leaves me to speak. And I've wrestled with this a bit. When I first saw the letter, I think my reaction was much of what Commissioner Cooney has so well verbalized. And I won't go through each point because I don't remember all of them, but I thought that, you know, more environmental review. We've already had 2 environmental impact reports, I believe. And what is there to add in that regard? And usually it's the applicant that's saying, you know, no more environmental review, enough's enough. Even on the wind turbines, you know, I looked at that reference to the wind turbines. I thought, is this a continuance? They can take another stab at saying what a bad idea wind turbines are, or is this what it appears to say, that they want to take another look at whether they're a good idea or not? I forgot to mention on ex parte site visits and whatnot, I did drive through the area and not long after the last hearing and counted turbines, and I counted a couple of dozen, but I think they're all on the north side, and I think this project's on the south side. That's kind of an irrelevant comment, other than that the wind turbines are something to talk about. And on the grasslands, I thought, well, it's interesting to talk about issues that have just come up because I'm the person who a few years ago said was it an MND or was it an EIR? I can't remember, is inadequate because it doesn't address the vegetation on that north side. No, that's the south side, isn't it? South side of the highway that I personally observed. And we had the AIR, and sure enough, it said, oh, you got some grasslands to deal with. I thought, well, would anyone who had been watching this for the last few years not think that I would bring that up? But, you know, this isn't the courtroom. It's a different kind of proceeding. There's not generally the same finality to each hearing as I've learned. So even though my intellect is saying there's not a real reason for this continuance, it's not going to go anywhere, my conscience tells me that it's important to have the fairest hearings possible. I know when I first became chair years ago, we had an oil matter, and I at least made that commitment to people, including people in the room, that we'd have the fairest hearing possible. And I always want to carry through with that for folks. So sometimes it leads to a messy process, and we have hearing after hearing, and we waste money and irritate everybody, and they keep having to come back. But we're all doing with this the goal of doing the best planning possible. So my conscience is telling me to actually vote for the continuance. Now, does you're all looking at me like,
what happens in the tie, guys?
Yeah. Well, nothing does.
Chair Park and Commissioners, so a tie vote under the procedures for the Planning Commission is deemed a denial of, I think that in this circumstance, we can interpret that a denial of that motion. So if there was a motion to continue that reached a 2-2 vote, I think it would fail to pass because it doesn't have a majority vote. And then we would go from there.
You know, I realize that, and I think the other commissioners do as well, but I think it's important we go through the process and carry it out. So if Commissioner Freeney, you spoke to it first, if you want to make a motion, I will second it so that it gets heard. And you may have convinced the other commissioners, or I may have, or who knows what, but let's find out.
Okay, thank you. Well, we don't really have a staff guideline to follow on this, but I would move to.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, thank you, Commissioner Freeney. You jogged my memory. So the applicants did not provide a date to continue it to. So options are we pick a date and continue it to another date specific, or we make a motion just to drop it from the agenda. So the way the memo reads is just to continue it to a future date, which is not possible. So we need a date specific, or we just drop it from the agenda. So if we want a date in the motion, then we can turn to staff and have a date, or we can just make a motion to drop it from the agenda, and then we would just agendize it later.
I'd like to speak to that point on timing, and I meant to, but often I forget what I'm talking about. There you go. Well, you'll all be this age someday. I'm reminded of a sort of similar request we had on Keysite 21. And what I would like to see, if there is a continuance, is not one that's made indefinitely, dropping from the agenda, not one that's made months and months from now. I'd want to see one so it returns within, I don't know, 30, 45 days. You're not going to be able to, if you get the continuance, you're not going to be able to do those environmental studies and all those things by then. But you can come back and say, hey, we really mean it. We're really going to try and change the project. We're going to try and do this and that. Give us a report of we're getting somewhere. And if the answer is no, we're just delaying it, the commission will vote and it'll probably vote to deny your project. But at least we could get a feedback on, are we getting somewhere? So that would be my preference. If there's a motion to continue, it's to a date that's, within 45 days or so.
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, based on that information, looking at the projection report, August 9th is a Santa Maria hearing date. Currently, there's nothing scheduled for that date, so we could just pick a date and just go with August 9th as a motion.
Want to make that part of your motion, Commissioner Farini? Okay. I don't even know how I'll vote on this, but I'm going to second the motion so it gets heard. And obviously, I've talked a lot. Do any of the South Coast commissioners that are in the South Coast right now want to speak to this motion further? Or should we go ahead and vote?
I think we're ready to vote on the motion, Mr. Chair.
Oh, okay. And Mr. Villalobos, you conduct a roll call vote.
Yes, and just to clarify, the motion is to continue the item to the August 9th hearing. Commissioner Cooney,
No.
Commissioner Bradley,
No.
Commissioner Farini,
Aye.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion is, vote is 2-2, motion fails.
Okay. So we'll go on to the hearing on the merits today, but we'll take a break right now and be back at 22, what is it? 22:11? You've taken that far already? Okay, yeah. 22:11. All right, we're reconvening our morning session of the Santa Barbara County Planning Commission hearing of May 10, 2023. And we're going to address what's item number 1 on our agenda, the North Fork Frost Ponds, now on its merits again. This is a matter that's been heard already. There was some tentative indication from planning commissioners about where they wanted to go on the merits, and a request was made for findings on denial. Those are here, but we'll have a full hearing on the project, which will start with, of course, any ex parte disclosures since the last hearing, and a staff report, which hopefully will address or at least emphasize the findings, and opportunity for commissioners to comment on that. But we'll also have presentations, if they wish to make them, from starting with the appellants and then the applicants. I'm going to ask that you go to 15 minutes for both opening statement and rebuttal, because I think the focus will be largely on the findings, but you can address whatever you need to regarding the merits. I just don't think we'll need as much speaking time as we had at the prior hearing. And there will be opportunity for public comment and rebuttal and additional questions by commissioners on from staff, and finally deliberations by commissioners and some sort of result. So that's what we'll do. Let's start with commissioners stating any ex parte disclosures they haven't already stated today.
None from us in the South.
Okay. And let me go ahead then to staff. You go ahead and make your presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Does David need to read in? Okay. All right. Thank you. This is a continuation of the North Fork Ranch Frost Ponds project. Just a brief recap of the recent history of this project. This was the project was considered by your commission on March 29th. And after deliberation, staff was directed to return today with findings to deny the project. The findings have been presented to you in a memo, and we are here today to answer any questions you may have on those findings. But today, staff is going to recommend that your commission uphold the Appeal 1717 of the zoning administrator's original approval of the proposed project, make the required findings for denial of the project, case 16 CUP 05, as specified in attachment A of the Planning Commission memo dated May 2nd of this year, and determine that denial of the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to guideline section 15270, which is a statutory exemption for projects that are disapproved. And that notice of exemption is included or attached to your memo as attachment B. And finally, staff recommends that your commission deny the project conditional use permit 1605. Like I said, we're here to answer any questions that you may have.
Well, thank you for your staff report. Let me ask if any of my fellow commissioners have questions right now of staff. Or comments. Oh, go ahead, Commissioner Cooney.
No, just a quick glance from Commissioner Bridley. We have nothing at this point, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Then let's go ahead with such presentation as appellants wish to make.
Good morning again, Chair Park and Commissioners. I'm here as an appellant and also representative of the Cuyama community and also as a farmer. We felt we had an extremely robust hearing on March 29th and really appreciated your in-depth questioning and conversations and deliberation regarding your move to deny the findings for denial for the EIR and the permit. And as an appellant, we appreciate the effort the staff has put into this and are strongly in support of all of the points in the letters of denial. We feel that it really covers all the key points discussed at the hearing, and we strongly encourage you to support the findings for denial. Furthermore, I want to acknowledge both staff and commissioners on your acknowledgement of Sigma and the critically overdrafted basin, the only one in Santa Barbara County, the Cuyama Basin, and its relevance to this decision. As a farmer, I strongly support farming. I believe in farming. I think it's really important. But if we don't have water, we're not going to be able to farm. And that's where this project is headed for us. So we support the letters for denial. Furthermore, I also want to highlight the support for letters of denial by both Eldon Sheffield and Randall Dognazzini, both extremely strong supporters of the right to farm, but both who strongly agree with the letters of denial because it is not an appropriate project for the Cuyama Basin because of the overdraft. Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm not sure who else in the appellant's team wants to speak. Ms. Citron, are you there? And is this something you want to chime in on or not?
I am here, and yes, I would like to briefly chime in if I may. We will be reserving the majority of our time for rebuttal since we haven't yet heard from the applicant regarding the denial findings. Since the staff report was posted last Wednesday, we have not seen anything in writing from the applicant regarding the findings for denial. But briefly now, the findings that are before you, again, we fully support the CEQA findings, as staff mentioned, are with respect to the denial only for projects that are disapproved. And the bulk of the findings for denial are your conditional use permit findings. And those findings involve a set of issues that are highly discretionary in your commission and really entrusted to your judgment. The findings must be supported by substantial evidence in the record. And in part because there have been so many rounds of environmental review and such an extensive record prepared for this project, there is ample evidence to support each and every finding and factual statement made in those findings. And we are supportive of them as drafted by staff and find that your commission is well within your discretion to adopt those, and they will be deferred to by any court should it get to that point. I briefly just want to mention, I hear Commissioner Farini's concerns about right to farm. We are sensitive to those, and I just want to restate that if that it's because this project is proposing 15.6 acres of reservoirs, and when you propose large reservoirs, that triggers a discretionary permit, a conditional use permit, and that is pursuant to the county code. That is not something that that your commission. It's not an issue before your commission today as to whether this project is appropriately reviewed with an EIR. The board made that determination. It's supported by the county code, and that ship has sailed. And I think the other thing that's important to note, that even if you did approve this project, it would not be carte blanche to the applicant to do whatever agricultural practices they want. Instead, because of the significant impacts to the Cuyama groundwater basin, there was mitigation required in the EIR that would be part of any approval that limits the water that can be used for frost protection to an amount that that would really not fulfill the purpose of the project. And as we talked about last time, in many ways, this project just does not make sense. And the significant impact to the groundwater basin, to biological resources, are reasons why denial of this project makes sense. And so we would urge you to follow up on the direction that you commenced last time, that you follow the recommended action as articulated in the staff memo, and that you take action today to deny this project. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Appellants, by my count, you've used 6 minutes, so you have 9 minutes left in rebuttal. And applicants, you ready to go? Mr. Tetley?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioners, Brian Tetley with Rural Planning Services. Just some general comments going back to March 29th, when staff was recommending approval of the project and that all the significant impacts were mitigated. The project, it's basically the water use is what we're talking about for the project. And we hear comments about the project would be 2 to 9 times the thresholds for evaporative water use. Of course, that's before mitigation in the document, which would, by staff, left to their own devices, of course, felt was adequately mitigated by the mitigation package to below the groundwater threshold. And when we speak to the SGMA and the groundwater management plan that's in place, and all the comments about how much water this project will use and how, writ large, the basin is critically drafted over basin as determined by the state. The implication is that the North Fork Ranch is under requirements to severely restrict their pumping because of that basin. In fact, there's zero requirements in that plan for the North Fork Ranch to reduce any kind of pumping. So that should be stated. And then as far as the specific findings, I direct your attention to finding 2.1.3, streets and adequacy of the streets and highways. We feel that this should be stricken from the findings. It speaks to traffic generated by grading trucks. The grading plan and the nature of grading for the reservoirs is you excavate, and then you utilize much of that excavation for the berms that are protecting the reservoir, and any other soils could be adequately taken on and used in other farm areas by the nearly 8,000 acre ranch. So we feel there'll be no impacts to the Highway 166 from grading activities due to the reservoirs. And then secondly and finally on finding 2.1.5, the third paragraph, we feel that should be deleted. That speaks to potential for slope failure or scouring of reservoir slopes due to the size of the proposed project. Size really doesn't enter into it. It's the adequacy of the erosion control measures that are taken. And those are obviously sized to the area that you're grading. So we feel that the county has more than adequate overview of the erosion control measures that will be taking place and required as part of the project. So with that, we reserve our time. Thanks.
Okay. And you'll have, I think, 12 minutes. Did I get that right, Mr. Villalobos? Okay, now is the time for public comment. I think we have 3 slips for people in the room. Is that right? Do we have anyone else besides Mr. Caldwell, Mr. Merrill, and Mr. Roy that wants to speak? Not yet, but I just want to know if I've got everyone. Okay, and then do we have people on Zoom? What do we have? 3? Okay. Let's do the Zoom first. We did them last on the motion for continuance, and as I could have predicted, I forgot about them. So let's start with them.
Our first speaker will be Lynn Carlisle.
And please hold your comments to 3 minutes or less. And if you
Sure.
could try to address the findings primarily, we appreciate that.
Surely. My name is Lynn Carlisle. I'm the Executive Director of the Cuyama Valley Family Resource Center and staff for the Cuyama Valley Community Association. We have over 100 members who attend our meetings monthly, and not everybody monthly, but we have 100 members we're in contact with. So we do represent many of the views in the Valley. I think my comments here are brief. I commented on the March 29th hearing, and I appreciate the commissioners' points of view and the points that they raised. I think that, as we said earlier, the CIR has been well vetted. A lot of the mitigation measures have been considered and not chosen to be included in the final proposal that was brought forth for the March 29th hearing. So any additional mitigation measures were considered not feasible for the project. I do appreciate the viewpoint that the commissioners have raised, and I do feel that we would urge the commission to vote for denial of this project. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carlisle. And who's next?
So we do have 2 other members present via Zoom. If you want to speak, go ahead and raise your hand. That's Casey Walsh or Mr. Califf. Okay. Our next speaker will be Casey Walsh.
Hello, my name is Casey Walsh. I'm an anthropology professor at UC Santa Barbara. For well nigh a decade, I've been accompanying the residents of Cuyama in their efforts to manage their groundwater sustainably. I've been following this particular EIR process as well over the years and have submitted comments in previous occasions. I would urge you to deny this as well. Thank you.
All right, unless Mr. Califf would like to speak, then that would be the end of our Zoom speakers. And not seeing a hand from Mr. Califf.
Okay, then let's go to our speakers in the room. And just to change things around, I had the order of Mr. Caldwell and Mr. Reed and Mr. Merrill, but if you have strong feelings about something different, step on up. Okay, Mr. Caldwell.
Chair Park, members of the commission, Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. I was at a rally one time in Sacramento, and there was a poster on the side of a bus that said, "Without water, it's just dirt." And without water, there's no right to farm. This is why water rights are inscribed in the state constitution of California, because without water, there is no right to farm. And we do have a right to farm, and you have to have water. Water is a property right. And again, there's no mention of that in these findings. Now, they even though when they publish SGMA, they claim, the California government claims SGMA will not affect the water rights of Californians. What it did, though, is made them analyze what's there for habitat for people and farms. Well, the one basin in this county that's got the most severe restrictions is Cuyama. 70% of the farms there are going to have to go idle, right? Because there's not enough water. You cite SGMA, but that SGMA authority didn't put any restrictions on this vineyard. You can't cite SGMA when the SGMA authority that's putting 70% restrictions on every other farmer there didn't cite this one because it's not in the same basin. For the South County supervisors, consider Goleta, Carpinteria, and Santa Barbara, 3 different basins. They're 10 miles away from each other, 3 different basins, 3 different aquifers. You can't treat them the same just because they have the same name, Cuyama, in their address. Now, this is a very important point here. The people involved with this operation, Oniveris and Merrill, are 2 of the most respected names in viticulture, not just in this county, but in the state of California. Does this planning commission think they're stupid? You must think they're stupid, because if they didn't need a permit to do wind turbines or these other things, they would have done that 5 years ago if it would have worked. They wouldn't have done an EIR. They would not have gone through 4 years of planning, time, energy, and money if something else would have worked. Where is the respect and trust of the 2 most respected family names go back 8 generations and 9 generations in agriculture in this region? Are they stupid? Why would they torture themselves by saying we need frost ponds if they didn't need frost ponds? The ag element, no mention in your findings, the ag element. The ag element specifically says we support the intensification of agriculture. That means going from passive ag to active ag. The other thing, habitat preservation. There's another 7,000 acres on this property for habitat preservation. And finally, I'll close
Mr.
with this.
Caldwell, our time's up, but can you finish up in about 30 seconds?
I certainly can.
Thanks.
The last finding, just the Planning Commission finds that the proposed project is not compatible and subordinate to the agricultural character. What the heck does that mean? Every vineyard on the region has a frost pond, but somehow the frost pond here is not subordinate to the agricultural character. Right to farm, ag element, SGMA, state constitution. You can't make those findings with those authorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. Let's see, Mr. Roy, you ready to go?
Chair Park and Commissioners, I'm Roy Reed again, President of Santa Barbara County Taxpayers Association. But why do people come here? Why do people come to California and to Santa Barbara County? Well, I have 4 great grandfathers all came to this county between 1840 and 1860. One was a lawyer from Maine, ultimately became district attorney, then bought a ranch in Foxen Canyon. Another was a minister and farmer from Tennessee, came here, got land in the valley floor. Another, a retired ship's captain from Chile, came here, married a coda in Santa Barbara, bought a ranch in Foxen Canyon. And the last one was a sheep man from England, rode with the family around Cape Horn, landed in Monterey County and walked here, bought a ranch. Why do they come here? Well, the area of commonality between these disparate individuals is they had hopes of acquiring land and having the freedom to use that land and its resources to bring it to its highest and best use. Same thing is happening today, although more often it's a recent arrival from Mexico hoping to acquire enough capital to put together some of his own strawberry ground and bring it to his best use. Also includes corporate players like the Harvard Trust or Brodea. Should they be treated any differently in their desire to bring their land to its highest and best use just because they're corporate and because they're from far away? We think not. We very carefully reviewed all the public comment, even the publications and comment from the Crimson cited by one of the commenters. The disappointing thing is a lot of this opposition seems to be more rooted in the desire to oppose the vineyard development as a whole, but this convenient artifact, the reservoir project, has been selected as a convenient target of opportunity to really attack the entire project in an effort to diminish the ability of the owner to exercise their rights to bring their property to its highest and best use. My family, we still retain about 2,000 acres here in the valley that we lease out to independent growers for their use, much like the relationship between Brodea and the Vineyard Partners, the group who's actually operating that vineyard. Therefore, we find it quite disappointing that their rights, their ability to farm, their freedom to do so are being attacked in this manner. We think the denial of this project has the potential of setting a fairly negative and perhaps dangerous precedent for agriculture and land rights in this county. We would be very disappointed to see you approve this motion for denial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Mr. Merrill?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, fellow board members. Again, I'm Kevin Merrill. I represent the Santa Barbara County Farm Bureau as well as the State Farm Bureau. It's almost incredible to me that we're even here discussing this, but we are. And I think we sent a couple of letters in support of this to you folks, and I'm not sure you got it. We've seen staff this morning. They received a zoning administrator hearing and all that stuff back in 2019. And, the staff said you should be able to move ahead with this with mitigation factors. Again, they went through the same thing with the EIR process. And if staff came back and said, if you do these mitigation steps, you should be allowed to put the reservoirs in. Comes back to this body, and you didn't like the answer, so you send it back and say, you guys need to come up with a plan that says, you need to deny this. After your own staff worked for years to develop this program, work on this project that says they should be allowed to put the reservoirs in. And so you don't like the answer, you send it back and say, I want staff to come up with a plan that says, now you must deny it. That doesn't seem very fair to me. And so the Farm Bureaus, both state and county, are very concerned that this is going to set a precedent not only for Santa Barbara County, but for the entire state. And we can't allow that to happen. Agriculture is the number one driver in the economy in Santa Barbara County. It is throughout the state. We are the reason that California is going to have the fourth largest economy in the world. It's because of agriculture. You can't stop putting in a reservoir that has historically been part of the important part of growing crops for hundreds of years here, based on something that is just not true. Those grapes are out there and they are growing now. The amount of water that they use is not going to change with those reservoirs. They're there for frost protection only. And I can say that because I'm wearing two hats today. I also are part of the management team out there on that vineyard. It is incredibly important to agriculture that you allow this to go through and you think carefully about what the precedent is setting, because it's not going to be taken lightly throughout the rest of the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Merrill. Okay, do we have anyone else either in the room or on Zoom that's a member of the public who wants to comment on this project today? Looks like the answer is no. Then let's go back to rebuttal. Rebuttal would be, who did I start with? The appellants. And you have 9 minutes. I doubt you need it, but was it 6? No, they use 6 and then they have 9 left.
Thank you, Chair Parks, and the rest of the commission and your great staff. I'm Steve Gleesman, once again, Condor's Hope Ranch, a dry farm, water conserving operation resident in the Cuyama Valley. And as we keep saying, the big issue is water. And the Cuyama, historically, does not have that water. We're not only a critically overdrafted groundwater basin, our only source of water other than rainfall is groundwater. There's no pipelines, there's no reservoirs, there's no permanent surface water. We have to take care of that groundwater. And we're looking towards the future. And the SGMA process and the GSA in the Cuyama has recognized the most critically overdrafted parts of the valley and recognize that the other parts are in trends downward towards that same bottom of the pool. And there may not be restrictions currently on the section of the basin that Harvard is farming. But looking forward to the trends of the downward levels of groundwater that we see, thanks to a very extensive monitoring system of wells, we know that the time to cut back is going to come. This is true throughout California. There's just not enough water. Kinds of farming that save water, that use less water, that depend more upon what nature gives us rather than what we extract from the past below ground, is going to become the future of agriculture. And it's not so much that 70% of the farms of our valley are going to have to go fallow. Those farms are going to have to farm in a different way. And historically, this area of the Harvard's vineyards is rangeland, a sustainable use of that agricultural area that doesn't require the water. This area has never been irrigated and probably never should have been. So I want to think forward, back again to water, and know that this is the impact that we're trying to avoid, of going down to the bottom of the pool and with no return. So again, I request the commission to follow the findings for denial, and push this system into using other alternatives that don't require that groundwater extraction. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else from the appellant team want to speak in rebuttal? Here's the dent. Oh, she does. Okay, Ms. Citron.
Thank you. I will be I'll be very brief. I think Ms. Jaffe and Mr. Gleesman have stated the issues and concerns much better than I ever could. I just want to respond briefly to a few of the statements made. Mr. Caldwell said that we're looking at 3 different basins. I would just say that the record before you does not bear that out. The threshold of significance that you apply in your CEQA documents, the 31 acre-feet threshold, applies to the entire Cuyama groundwater basin, including this project that is not subject to dispute. And with respect to that threshold, we heard from Mr. Merrill that the amount of water use will not increase with this project. And I just want to remind the commission that what you're looking at as subject to the 31 acre-foot threshold is evaporative losses. So essentially water that's wasted. And this project would substantially increase the water that's wasted. And as I stated before, the mitigation measure that would be required to keep those evaporative losses to 31 acre-feet are so draconian that the project could not be used for its intended purpose. It would not provide effective frost protection for the vineyard. Meanwhile, would develop 15.6 acres of land, native grasses. And we also heard that every vineyard has a frost pond. Well, every vineyard does not have 15.6 acres of frost ponds without the clearly demonstrated need, as we've seen here with the mitigation in place. This project just would not fulfill its purpose. And I would just bring you back to the findings. They are thorough. They are supported by substantial evidence, and we would urge you to adopt them as drafted. Thank you very much.
Okay, appears the appellants are finished with their rebuttal. And let's go to the applicants. And you have 12 minutes if you want to take it.
Mr. Chair, Brian Tetley again from Rural Planning Services will take a minute at most. no more comments on the specific findings, but in regards to comments about sustainability and water use. I mean, back a couple months ago, your staff indicated that this project was sustainable according to the thresholds that your commission is bound by, is including the mitigation package. Sigma and the groundwater sustainability plan that's in place basically says that this project is, this property rather, is sustainable because no pumping restrictions are anticipated for this project or required for this property. We hear comments about there's a downward trend in this part of the aquifer. Well, we're in the land of tautology here because these wells are pumping for the vineyard. And of course, prior to this project, there is little to no pumping in this area. So of course, you have a downward trend, so to speak, because there was no pumping before. So the water levels have decreased as pumping has increased. But as I've said, it's sustainable according to your staff and the rules that you govern, and sustainable according to Sigma. With that, we're here for any questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tetley. Does anyone have questions of Mr. Tetley? All right. Well, we've had our public comment. We've had presentations, including rebuttal from appellants and applications. So now we'll go ahead and close the public hearing. And let me ask if staff has anything they want to add. Looks like the answer is no. Do planning commissioners have any questions of staff? Looks like the answer is no. So let's proceed with deliberations.
Got some questions.
Oh, you have questions of staff. Go ahead, Commissioner Farini.
Okay, thank you. On 21.2 in staff's explanation, I don't recall having information introduced to us substantiating this claim on the wind machines. I've heard different members of the public discuss that they could be used, but I don't recall hearing any certified body like an engineer or a crop planner, anybody like that, maybe someone from the USDA or CDFA. I don't recall hearing any of that to substantiate that. Could you shore that up a little, please?
Yeah, I will try, Chair Park, Commissioner Farini. We, staff did have some discussions with the applicant about the use of wind machines. And their response was that they don't provide the level of protection that is equal to what they could achieve with spray irrigation. There, I guess, just topography and climatic conditions at the project site that don't facilitate, don't achieve air mixing that would prevent frost damage. The lack of analysis of alternatives analysis was in part based on those discussions.
Okay, so my interpretation of that is then that the applicant doesn't agree with this, right? And that there's no one to substantiate that the use of wind machines is a good alternative. We don't have any.
Chair Park and Commissioner Farini, I think, so, findings are an art form in some ways. The commission has a lot of discretion. This is a CUP. So the way that we drafted this was based on comments we heard from the commissioners at the last hearing. It specifically said a redesign project that is smaller in size or that utilizes alternative measures such as wind machines could meet the objective of providing frost protection and would result. So we're leaving it out there that it could. This is a discretionary finding that your body is making. you do have the opportunity to amend these if you want, but this is just based on the feedback we got from the commissioners that wanted to bring back findings for denial.
I understand that.
Okay,
This
okay.
is, I understand what you're doing here. I'm just saying from my perspective, I think these findings are not substantiated. I know I'm gonna, I do know how to count. I know it's gonna be 3-1, but it's just a discussion, okay? The thing on 2.1.3 on the use of the highways to transport equipment to and from a farm, we'd have to shut down the whole valley here in Santa Maria, not just Cuyama, if we were to use this precedent. So I don't know how we can say this 2.1.3, that we can't use the highways. There's a special permit process that you go through with Caltrans and the California Highway Patrol when you do need to move heavy equipment that may be oversized. And though I'm familiar with how that's done, I wouldn't say that I could even sit here and say we could uphold 2.1.3. What say you?
Commissioner Farini. The analysis that has been done by staff in the with the original MND and then the subsequent EIR, there was not a finding that the traffic would result in a significant impact. That's not the intent of this finding either. It's a standard practice, if you will, when making findings for denial. You make a negative finding or a negative determination for all of the findings.
Okay, on 2.15, we talk about compatibility with the neighborhood. And I believe this land and the surrounding lands are zoned Ag 2.
Correct.
And I think that under the LUDC and the zoning code that means any type of farming or agricultural activity. So here we're saying that it's our opinion that this type of farm, so we're saying what type of farming is compatible with the neighborhood farms. I think that's pretty unprecedented. How do we square that up?
I think the emphasis here is not on the vineyard, but the reservoirs. And again, the finding is not that it's a significant impact. It's just that through the direction of the commission and their discretion through the CUP, that the findings for approval could not be made.
Very good. And then understanding this discretionary review of the declining groundwater level in the project region, which have declined substantially. I believe that statement is in conflict with the Sigma report.
What number are you on now?
22.1.5.
Oh, still there. Okay.
Yeah. Slowly moving on.
No, I'm not hurrying you. I just wanted to follow.
How do you arrive at the term substantial when the report to me does not appear to be substantial? Is there a registered hydrogeologist that has stated in this report that the wells on the western Cuyama Basin are in substantial decline, or is this a mixture of the eastern reports and then overlapping that into the western reports?
Commissioner Farini. Okay, I think we're looking at 2.1.5 finding. I think the declining groundwater levels in the project region, which have declined substantially, in part, staff is basing that on the Cuyama Valley Groundwater Basin Management, which describes the area as high priority and critically overdrafted. So that's probably how that connection was made.
Correct. And
Yep.
then that report, though, does not use the term substantial for this western area, correct? It's just a term that evolved after staff's review and trying to incorporate in the planning commission's desire to have that language.
I understand.
Can you substantiate the use of the word substantial based on hydrogeological evidence
Commissioner Finney.
introduced into the record?
Commissioner Finney, I will try. As has been mentioned several times today, there have been iterations of this EIR. And one of those was to include information that was presented in the most recent Sigma report that was submitted by the state and ultimately approved by the state. And in the EIR, there's a figure that shows well hydrographs for two of the wells that are used by the project to irrigate the vineyard. And those hydrographs show that in the last 4 or 5 years, there has been a 40, 50-foot drop in groundwater levels in those wells. So that's the basis. That's the information that was used.
So an old farmer told me one time, figures lie and liars figure. So I'm always real careful with that. So if it's declined, say 50 feet, what is the usable depth of water? So in other words, proportionally, what percentage of the basin is lost? And then also an aside here would say that there's nothing noting that we were in an extreme drought period during this time that those numbers were taken. And that is actually something that the state declared, not that can be substantiated. And then what is the recollection? Go ahead, Travis. Mr. Seward.
Commissioner Freeney, understood. I don't know if I have an answer for you. I think we just, again, I think Mr. Rodriguez's answer with the graphs and the data provided by the Water Management Agency, and then just, again, staff tried to draft these on the direction and comments given by the commission, but I understand your comments.
Okay, thank
Yep.
you. And then 2.16. I'll just say I think that whole statement there in that is in conflict with judicial due process, and that by using that, we are leapfrogging past the judiciary. I guess that's more of a deliberation. Thank you, staff, for your patience and efforts.
Thank you, Commissioner Freeney. Does anyone else on the commission have questions of staff? Then let's move on to deliberations. Would you like to start, Commissioner Cooney, because it is your district?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start by reminding us that this particular project and the subject of it in the Cuyama Valley happens to be at this point in time in the first district, but I very much feel like most of our projects that we are all responsible to do what we think is best for this project. It's no more on my shoulders than it is on the rest of us. So that's why we have our votes and our deliberations, and I think this is a perfect instance of how we can differ with people we deeply respect. For example, in today's hearing alone, we've heard from prominent representatives of agriculture, telling us, in effect, that how you decide this project is a dangerous precedent if you don't allow it and disregard these findings. On the other hand, there are some farmers in the record that have supported making a distinction between what happens in the western basin of the Cuyama Valley, the western water basin, and what happens generally throughout the Cuyama Valley and then beyond. Our fight isn't with agriculture. On the contrary, the record will show that in most cases where it's become an issue at all, the commission has supported the proliferation of agriculture. So I have a problem if the interpretation of any issue which may in the future, in the reasonable future, be a threat to agriculture because there isn't enough water to support it, is something we have to take into account, and we've been urged to do that by the appellants. Look at the situation broadly. Don't look at it narrowly and say this is a precedent for the end of agriculture, because I think the contrary is true. But when Commissioner Farini raises questions about the basis for our decision, I think we have to pay attention to that, and I am concerned that we be accurate in our conclusions that support the findings. With regard to staff, Mr. Tetley, whom I also have great respect for and have heard present clients' proposals for many, many years, saying that our staff determined that the groundwater basin is sustainable with the use of this project. And therefore, why are we deciding differently? Who are we to decide differently? And it really is a legitimate question. If the staff had determined that this project was adequately dealt with in terms of offsets and other remediation, they would have said so and did. And it's really up to us to accept staff's views or not in our independent discretion to decide these issues. We rely heavily on staff, but we don't always agree and automatically, and we're not required to. So with respect to this project, I think we all worked very hard to come up with the result, and the findings do in large support the conclusion of a majority at the March 29 hearing. I have no deep affection for finding 2.1.3, which strays onto the streets and highways and their possible effect on the public welfare, and I'm not making that connection. I'd be willing to eliminate that. But for the rest, I think it does support, they do support appropriately what the commission's majority intended. And if we're wrong in the eyes of the Board of Supervisors in a few months, that is part of the democratic process in which we play an important part. Those are my comments, Mr. Chair.
Do we have additional comments in deliberation from the other commissioners?
Down here in the South Coast, I'll give it a go. Like Commissioner Cooney, I really listen carefully to what our Commissioner Farini says about these things, and I think I've stated on record many times in other cases that are agriculturally related that I try to protect ag. This situation about water is very, very deep, and pardon the pun. That SGMA creation by the state, to me, kind of talks about how we need to manage things on a state level and a regional level. So some of the testimony today from our County Farm Bureau, professionals, I found persuasive. However, I think we're in a new era. And unfortunately, this case is getting caught in the middle of it. So I actually totally concur with all of the findings, with the exception of the 2.1.3, and want to send a shout out to Mr. Tetley for raising that. I don't think this has anything to do that would impact roads or highways. But all the other findings I completely endorse, and therefore would be supportive of the motion outlined in the staff report and the findings before us today.
Commissioner Farini, did you have comments you'd wanted to make?
I think everybody pretty much got the gist of where I was going with this, but to me, this is a very technical issue, and I think that this commission lacks the evidence, the technical evidence and analysis to move forward with the denial of this project. Every one of these conditions seems to be dependent on saying that they're going to be using too much water to protect their crop without really showing the relevance of how insignificant that amount of water can be, and looking at the long-term averaging and balancing of that use. So I will be voting against the findings.
Okay, I'll make a few comments. I think that this case presents a very interesting intersection of all sorts of important principles regarding agriculture and water use, and what occurs in the Cuyama Valley and so forth. Those are in front of us today in the sense that you're welcome to make comments about them, and it's useful for planning commissioners to have context. But I believe a lot of the comments I heard today about precedent were overly general for what we have in front of us. And I'm not picking on the applicant's side, because I heard the same thing. I had the same reaction to so much of the arguments, or so many of the arguments that were made by folks on the appellant side. Not so much today, but at the much longer hearing that we had. But for those narrower issues that are based on this project and these circumstances, with the presentation from staff of what our legal jurisdiction is here at the Planning Commission, I think that we can go forward, and I do believe that we need to deny this project under those circumstances and under the laws that apply. The findings themselves, I think staff did a good job of drafting them. I admire you for that. If I was to be drafting findings, I would take a long time. It's not really quite my job. And I would modify them. I'd refine them a lot, probably have much narrower findings than we generally do see on our projects. But I realize it's a practical matter. We have to have so many commissioners who will support a set of findings, whether we think they are ideal or not. So I would be glad to see any motion to adopt these findings to delete finding 2.1.3, and I can see the value of cutting other things out. But I'm going to leave that to whoever wishes to make a motion on this project.
I'm prepared to make the motion as the first district commissioner, recognizing that we don't all agree on this, but we've spent a lot of time and effort to do what's right, and for that reason, I'll follow staff's recommendation in this motion, with the exception of finding 2.1.3. The motion is to uphold the appeal, case number 17 APL 17, to make the required findings for denial of the project, case number 16 CUP 00005, as specified in attachment A to the memo of staff, which is dated May 2nd, 2023. We determined that the denial of the project is exempt from CEQA pursuant to CEQA guidelines, section 15270A, included as attachment B to this memo, and we deny the project case number 16 CUP string zeros 5. That's the motion.
And I'm happy to second that motion, Mr. Chair.
Secretary Wilson, you look like you have some thoughts on the particular motion.
Mr. Chair and
Or you're
Commissioners,
just hungry and ready to go to lunch, or maybe both.
it's both.
Okay,
Mr. Chair and Commissioners, just for the motion maker, Commissioner Cooney, just want to clarify that that motion as stated includes the findings as revised today, which is to remove finding 2.1.3. I did hear that. And I just want to clarify if the motion does include that.
It does absolutely, Mr. Wilson. Thank you. If I were in the room with you, I would have seen your concern at the way I expressed it, but I do mean to include the deletion of finding 2.1.3.
And I concur.
okay. So we have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any further comments from commissioners in deliberation on the motion that's now before us? The answer appears to be no. So, Mr. Villalobos, will you conduct a roll call vote?
Commissioner Cooney,
Aye.
Commissioner Bradley,
Aye.
Commissioner Farini,
No.
Chair Park.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-1.
Okay. Do we have any other business before the commission today?
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, that concludes our business for today.
Then we're adjourned.